is not do not make. The heart of it is there is nothing like me. You can't make anything to worship that is like me. And so here in verse 23, you shall not make anything to be with me. There is nothing that can be with me that is like me that can stand in my presence. Do you remember the story of the ark and Dagon? Do you guys remember that story? When the Philistines brought the ark into the presence of their god Dagon, and he fell over and eventually fell over and broke in pieces. There is nothing like our God. There is an emphasis on the separateness of God, the otherness. You've heard me use that word back when we were teaching through this, the holiness of God, that there is an otherness about our God, a separateness. There is no one, there is nothing like me. And so the heart of the command is not do not make, it is that you can't make anything like me, so don't even try. And there is nothing that you can make that can stand in my presence that can be with me. Gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. Don't do it, because they're not like me. Gold is not like me. Silver is not like me. No creature is like me. You can't do that. Now, when we talk about a graven image of Jesus or a picture of Jesus, Jesus came as God in the flesh. In other words, God came with a body. He came as one of us. And therefore, if God came with one of us, there is now an image of God, a physical image of God. Now, it doesn't mean that we go around, you look at, Jesus has this certain look when you watch movies and you see pictures. He has this certain look. Now, I would disagree with the kind of picture they had in there, because he was kind of like this bobtail Jesus. You know, had this nice little bowl cut in the back, and it looked kind of weird, but the idea is that the heart of it is that there is nothing, there is no one like me. And God says, don't make anything to put in my presence. Now, verse 24, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I record my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. And if you make an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you shall profane it. Nor shall you go up by the steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. Now, there's a lot there, and we're not going to talk about all of it tonight, but here's what I want you to understand. Number one, an altar. In Latin, we use the word altar. It means a high place, something like this. But in Hebrew, the word in Hebrew means a place of sacrifice or a place of killing. And so here we have this idea that building an altar for a place of sacrifice, a place of killing. Isn't it interesting that God gives the 10 Commandments, and the first part of His law following, His practical law following that, is one about the altar? Why is that? Make what? I think you're on the right track.
That's where the burnt offerings were given to Him in the Old Testament, I guess.
And what were the burnt offerings for? Sin. 10 Commandments. Follow me. Do these things. By the way, here's an altar. In other words, the expectation from God was that they were going to fail. And so immediately after giving the 10 Commandments, here's God giving this place of sacrifice. It's an altar of earth or stone compared to the ornate altars of the people in which they had lived. There were some, in the use of these, there were some beams or uncut. He said there's some beams, especially when you get into the altars Farther on into the children of Israel, the history of the children of Israel, as God gives more revelation, there's some beams and uncut stones that will do. But I want you to understand the altar is not the focus, is it? What is the focus of the altar? The sacrifice. And the sacrifice is for what? For the sin. Chapter 21. I love it that our first one here back is about a controversial subject. It's about slavery. One of the first laws outside of the laws of the altar are concerning servants or slaves. The truth is that we have anesthetized the word that's used here, ibed. It has certain nuances in Hebrew, and it can mean different things, but ultimately it means a slave. It means someone who is a slave. Now, we call it a servant. We call them bond servants, as a matter of fact. When you look into the New Testament, the word is doulos. Not ibed, but doulos. And doulos means a bond slave. That is, in other words, a bond slave, as we'll see in a moment as we read, a bond slave is someone who says, I want to be your slave because I love you. And Paul and Timothy and James and Jude and Peter all start their epistles by saying their name, a bond servant of Jesus. I love my master, and I am his servant because I love him. I am his servant forever. Once a bondservant, once a servant, a slave, becomes a bondservant or a bond slave, they are a slave forever. There is no year of jubilee for the bondservant. Now, I believe that if you're going to be a minister, if you're going to be a pastor, if you're going to be an elder, if you're going to be a deacon, if you're going to be a husband, if you're going to be a wife, if you're going to be a mother or a father, we must be servants. Jesus says, the emphasis of Jesus is on servants. Now, that's not the kind that we're talking about here in this part that we're reading. Let's read it, and then we'll talk about it in a minute. Now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him his sons and daughters, the wife and the children shall be his master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then this master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, we'll stop there for a second. There's actually a psalm that talks similar to this, that Jesus, he says to the Father, you shall open my ear. And that's what's happening here, is there's an opening and an earring of ownership that's placed into the ear of the servant. And he now becomes a servant of the master forever, because notice what it says in verse 5. If he plainly says, I love my master, I love my wife, and I love my children, I will not go out free. We are to be the bondservants and the bond slaves of Jesus. Now, there were also bondservants. Now, one of the things that I think we need to make clear is when we think of slavery, we kind of relate slavery to what we've experienced here in North America, known and understood as a very evil, dark thing. For the most part, in the Hebrew world, it typically centered around debts that were owed or the inability to have money or to pay money, which is why every 6 years the freedom was offered. But there's also the idea of, look at verse 7. A man sells his daughter to be a female slave. She shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does, or she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her I'm sorry, my eyes are not working tonight. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, then he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three things, if he does not do these three for her, then he shall go out free. She shall go out free without paying money. My reading is absolutely being slaughtered. Apologize for that. So we have here a situation. This is not necessarily being sold, a father selling his daughter into slavery. This is, for most people, they believe that this is a dowry, that a daughter has been given away for dowry and she serves until the marriage, and then in the marriage, if the one who is received the dowry is not, who pays the dowry, does not fulfill his purpose, then he must set her free. One of the things that I want us to understand that in all of this, God does not condone slavery. But what God is doing is regulating slavery, which is something that the people are going to be doing and have done. So God is not condoning, but He's giving regulations to that. In other words, He's taking care of the slave. He's making sure that the slave is taken care of. And we'll see that as we go along. Look at now verse 12. He strikes a man so that he dies. Now, we're just going to read these next stuff because we're going to read all of these all the way through the end of chapter 22 and just stop and talk about them, the practical side of these. Some of them are interesting, to say the least. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall be surely put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. Do you remember what that was? What was it called? Farther into the law, what was it called? City of Refuge. So when George and I get in a fight, and George takes his ball bat and smacks me upside the head, and I've had concussions already, and it was the last one, and I'm gone. George has the ability then to go to the place of refuge that he's referring to. I will set these up for you. He refers that to that. Because, as we go farther into the law, there's also one who is called the avenger of blood. Even though the killing wasn't intentional, it happened, and now some of my family members can avenge my blood, and so they can go after George, and George has to make his way to the city of refuge. And if he can make his way to a city of refuge, then he can be safe. He says, however, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hands, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man, now watch where we move from the accidental killing. Now, if you kill somebody with intent, verse 12 is pretty clear on what your punishment is. You shall be put to death. Verse 14, but if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. Now, that's an interesting way to put this, isn't it? In other words, a man has premeditated someone's murder. This time, George is so upset with me that he sat in his house and predetermined how he was going to kill me with treachery. And he carries out his plan. And he goes, oh no, that was so bad. And he comes to the altar. God says, take him away from my altar and do what with him? Kill him. It goes back to, do you remember when back in Genesis where it says, the blood of the one who dies, God's going to avenge it? Here is exactly what he's talking about. And he says that if he does this with treachery, you can't use a misapplied faith to get out of it. Now, we spoke this morning about justice. God does not need anyone to enact his justice for him. I will go back to the events of the week. There was a young man who pulled a trigger and shot a man. A confused, demonically influenced young man who did this. What I don't believe God is saying, especially when we get into the New Testament, is that the man can't repent. Do you believe that God could save Tyler Robinson?
Yes.
Can he save him?
Yes.
Absolutely. And you want to know what I think? I think if Tyler Robinson were to say yes to Jesus and they give him the death penalty and they execute him here on this earth, when he enters into heaven, I think one of the first people besides Jesus that's going to be waiting in line to hug his neck is Charlie Kirk. It's hard for us to understand. But that's the truth of the gospel. The truth of the gospel is that God can save even the assassin of a good man and send him to heaven. But that does not, his decision to follow Jesus does not remove the consequence of judgment here on this earth, which is exactly why I said what I said this morning, that God has his system of judgment here on earth, and if it doesn't work here on earth, it will work in eternity. And so we don't need God's help. We don't need to help God, We don't need to help God to enact his justice. Here he's saying, carry out justice. God is giving them a reason to carry out justice, and you can't misapply faith holding on to the horns of the altar because you don't want to face the consequence. Remove him from the altar. I take too much time for things like that. And he who strikes his father, verse 15, or his mother shall be surely put to death. Wow. Why would God want to do that? It's exactly what's the command? Honor your parents, honor your mother and your father, and you shall live long. Curse or hit your father or your mother, and what? You shall die. It begins to creep in and destroy the plan of God for the family, doesn't it? When we begin to allow those kinds of things. And God said, don't let it happen. Verse 16, he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. Again, kidnapping, and boy, if we had these kind of laws today, we'd probably, if we executed judgment like God wanted it to be executed, there'd be a lot less of this stuff, wouldn't there? Verse 17, and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Again, related back to verse 15. If men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed. In other words, George hits me, I'm down and out for a few weeks, but I'm okay. I come back, I'm able to walk with a cane or a crutch. He says, but if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. It has the idea of being exempt from the punishment that would come his way. He shall only pay for the loss of his time and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. In other words, George is responsible for paying me for my lost time at work and to make sure that I have all of the medical needs taken care of. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. I have a hard time working through that one. I'll just be honest with you. I've found it difficult to work through it, and I'm not going to even try to give you a great clarity of meaning there. If men fight and hurt a woman with a child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So not only is it the judges that are determining, but it's also the father or the husband that's determining what's happened because they fought and they hit a wife who was pregnant. Don't you I find it interesting that in the world that we live in today, in which abortion is pushed so heavily, that we can't turn to simple verses like these and see that life is life. And it is sacred. You are exactly right. Life is life and it is sacred. But if any harm follows, what is he referring to there?
If there's any harm to the baby.
That's right. If she has a baby prematurely because of the fight and the baby is fine, then the man has to be punished according to the father and the judges. But if something happens, then you shall give life for life. Now wait a minute, it's a fetus. It's an embryo. It's a life for life. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. In other words, if the slave is struck and their eye is damaged permanently, then the slave can go free. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. Verse 28, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. In other words, a dog goes out and bites and hurts someone seriously. The dog has to be put down, but I am acquitted. But there's a caveat to this. But if the ox tended to thrust, in other words, the ox has done this before, has gone out to thrust with its horn in time past, and it has been made known to its owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. Wow, that's pretty stiff. That if I've got an animal that's known for killing and I don't protect other people from that animal, then I need to be, not only does the animal get put to death, but I get put to death because of my foolishness. Now, I'll give you an example. We had a dog, lovely dog, sweetest dog in the world for a while. We had one of our children that lived in our house with us that was pretty mean to the dog, and we think that that's what caused the dog to go dark. And we had an 83-year-old woman that came to our house, and she got out of the car. As soon as she got out of the car and turned her back, the dog went up and bit her on the thigh. First time he had bit. He'd started barking at people when they would come in, but this is the first time he bit. And I looked at the dog and said, that's one and the last. And so it wasn't too long after that in the summer, we had a nurse from the hospital that was jogging in front of our house, and the dog went out and bit the neighbor. or bit this lady that she was jogging. As soon as she went by, he bit her on the thigh. That was it. Now I know that it wasn't just a fluke that my dog did this. And so he was put away. This is the kind of application that you have here for this. If we have an animal that's known for these kinds of things, then this is what we have to do. If there is an imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life, whatever is imposed. You can read these and go on. There's things about servants. If he gores a servant, then shekels are paid. And if a man digs a pit and the animal falls into the pit, then he has to make restitution for that. Look at chapter 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. In other words, it's going to cost you more. You're going to have to pay more than what you stole. If the sun has risen on him, verse 2. If a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for his bloodshed. This just recently happened in our country. Do you remember that? And this question was asked to Danielle Smith and Pierre Poliev. What about somebody breaking into your house? And he says, if you're in my house and somewhere you're not supposed to be, and what do you expect? You're going to get shot. But if you look at verse 3, if the sun has risen on him, in other words, you're not guilty of murder. It's considered self-defense and protection of your property. Down in the States, I've seen these videos comparing the attitude of Canada. You remember, I don't know if you saw those, where the RCMP came out in Toronto because someone was beaten pretty severely and they arrested the homeowner. That's what that was all about. They arrested the homeowner. And the RCMP came out and said, look, if they want your keys, just give them your keys and call the police and wait. That's probably not going to happen. For most people that have good common sense or protection mechanism, that's not going to happen. You come into my house, you're in my house, and I'm not going to react that way. In Florida, they said, if somebody comes in your house, shoot them. As a matter of fact, we would appreciate you shooting them. Like, oh my goodness, that's pretty bad. But here, he says that you're not guilty of bloodshed. Now, look what it says, though, in verse 3. If the sun is risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. In other words, if it's daytime, you can't kill it. He should make full restitution. That is, the one who's breaking in shall make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. Here's another reason for he owes, and so he had to be sold into slavery for his debt. If the theft is certainly found alive, in other words, the ox or the donkey or whatever he's stolen, if it's found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. In other words, fix your fences. And that's a pretty big given among ranchers and people that have neighbors that do that ranch. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain, standing grain, or field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man delivers, we still see some of these laws that are enacted today. You start a forest fire and you're found, you're actually charged for it, and you become financially responsible. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of a man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If I give you something of mine to protect it, and somebody breaks in your house and steals it, that thief gets in your house and steals it, then that thief is caught, then he has to repay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house, in other words, the one who's keeping the stuff, shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. You understand what he's asking or what he's saying? If it needs to be known whether the guy's lying about somebody breaking in and stealing his stuff. And he says, for any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, or sheep, or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any animal to keep, and it dies, it is hurt or driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand in his neighbor's goods. In other words, if it's disappeared, if it's gone, then we have an oath between one another. I did not do this on purpose. I didn't take your animal and kill it and put it in my freezer. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. Now, there's a reference in the last verse of this chapter that talks about an animal not eating the meat of an animal that was torn up because of the commitment to holiness. And if a man borrows, if a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it, not being with it, he shall surely make it good. Just so you know, George probably knows this well, you should probably think twice when I ask to borrow something. Because it's probably going to get broke. Or maybe you should think once, because if you give it to me, I'll use it, it'll get broken, you'll get a new one. But that's what this is saying. I don't think I broke anything of yours, or at least not a whole lot. I borrow a lot of stuff from George. He's like the Home Depot in Pincher. But if it, let's see, verse 16. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. In other words, if you go out and you seek a woman and you have sex with her, and she is not betrothed to someone else, then you must pay the bride price, pay the father, again, referencing back to, and if a man sells his daughter in verse 7 of chapter 21, you must pay the bride price, and you must take her as your wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of the virgins. You shall not permit. So, in other words, it's pretty important that to God, one of the things when I see this, I see purity. Don't you? That when a man and a woman are to be married, something that we see throughout the Scriptures is purity. And what God is trying to do is to protect that purity, isn't He? If you're going to entice a woman and have sex with her, you're going to marry her. We're going to protect that. She must become your bride. But ultimately, the father can refuse that, and he has to pay the money according to the bride price of the virgins. Now, verse 18, you shall not permit a sorceress, how do you say that? I'm sorry. Sorceress to live. Wow. You can't let a medium live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. These are things that if people do some of these things, God's saying they need to be destroyed. They should die. Don't let that in your... we'll talk about that at the end. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry to me, they cry out at all to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like the moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garments as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. Why would that be? That's right. It's because it's the only cloak they have, the only covering that they have. You take it as a pledge. But if he does not come back with his pledge by the nightfall, you are to give him his cloak back, because he's going to be cold. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. You shall not revile God or cause a ruler of your people, or curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices, the firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with the oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. Now verse 31, we'll end with this. And you shall be holy men to me. All of this, all of these regulations and all of these laws are for this intention right here. You hear what he's saying? The purity, sexual purity, the not making money on the poor people. All of these things, they seem, don't let a sorceress among you. Don't let them live. In other words, the whole idea of the children of Israel is God was called out to Abraham to set aside a people that would be his people, that would prove and show to the rest of the world that God is God. The separateness. There is no other God like me. There is none like me. There has never been, and there never will be, and I want the people to know it, and you're the way I'm going to show the people that I am other, that I am different. And so he says, these are the regulations, and we're going to get more as we go into Leviticus. It gets so much deeper in Leviticus, and I don't even know how we're going to teach through that. But the laws are going to be more intense because of the holiness of God. And God is saying, you shall be to me holy men, holy people. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. In other words, it becomes unclean when it's torn. Don't eat of it. I remember one time, I kind of thought about this when I was studying this week. I had a native friend of mine. We were out hunting in the porcupines, and we had separated. Actually, on the way down, we had separated. We were heading back to the truck, and we were on the way down to one of the top of the big hills out there, and headed down the truck. And he took the roadway down, which we had walked up earlier in the morning, and I took the coulee coming down on the one side. And we were going to meet at the truck. Well, I beat him to the truck. I couldn't understand why in the world. How did I beat Doug to the truck? And surely he must have saw something and was waiting. I had no idea. And finally, he come around, native guy, but he come walking, and he was white as I am. And I knew something like, "What's going on? What's wrong, man?" He said, "Was there an elk on the road when we came up?" And I'm like, "No." He said, "Well, I just come around the corner, and there was a cougar on top of an elk." And he had just come around the corner when the cougar had killed the elk, and when he came around the corner, the cougar jumped off into the woods. That's why he was scared. He was scared that the cougar was going to come get him. And so I'm like, "Hey, let's go back." Well, you told me. You remember I said this morning I don't get afraid of much, and I'm like, "Hey, let's go back up there." So we went back up, and sure enough, what had happened? We traced his tracks up on the hill. The elk had been gut shot, probably the day before, had laid down at the top of the hill. The cougar had come on it and chased it down the side of the hill, and just as it got to the road, an opening, the cougar jumped You could see this all in the snow tracks. The cougar jumped, landed on the back of the neck. It hit the ground, hit the road, and slid right up on the ditch on the other side where they had piled the dirt, and the ditch up there in the snow, and there it died. And I'm like, we're not going to waste this animal. But it had been gut shot. Somebody had already shot it. It's just the cougar put it out of its misery. And I didn't think much about that until I got here. And I thought maybe that was not good. But the law has been fulfilled. Anyway, that's just that. I don't even know why I shared that story with you. Sorry about that. Holy men, the laws of God, the intention is to point to a God who is different than all others. And we are the vehicle, the venue by which we do that. This morning, I meant to say something about venues. Most of us are never going to have a venue on the internet, are we? We're not going to have hundreds of thousands of followers. We're not going to be on YouTube. Hundreds and thousands of people are not going to be watching our videos. They're not going to be listening to us talk. We're lucky if we get more than 100 views on our messages on Sunday mornings. Most of us are never going to go viral, as they call it today. And so the venue that you have is your life. The life you live here and now, this is the venue, where you live now. And that's why we need to speak up where we live in our lives. That's why we need to live as husband and wife in a way that honors God, because that's our venue. The venue is your church. The venue is your neighborhood. The venue is your family, as your husband, as a father and a mother. That's your venue. And that's where we need to be speaking truth and living truth in love. Amen? Living as holy men and women to God, so that our God is seen as the one who He is, and that is the separate one, the Holy One. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. I pray that these kinds of things and teachings, they get drawn out and sometimes boring, and Lord, but they're not, because they have a purpose. You had a purpose in the laws, and the purpose in the laws was to produce holy men who could present a proper picture of a holy God. And so, Lord, I pray that you would help us to do that we would be men and women of integrity, that we would be men and women of purity, Lord, so that we can point people to a holy God, a God who is different than all others. We pray these things now in the name of Jesus. Amen. Bless you guys. We'll see you next week. Exodus 23, maybe 24. Haven't quite studied 24 yet, so...